educate, empower, enable, impact. Thank you for tuning in to That Will Never Work podcast, where we share inspiring information and personal experiences related to business and the entrepreneurial journey from those who are leaders in their respective field. Now, here is your host, author and business coach, Maurice.
I thank you very much for tuning in today. I have an award-winning author, a passionate landscape architect whose journey from a family farm in Belgium to regenerative farming practices has led him to believe that landscape architects can indeed change the world. His fascination with plants since childhood drove him to become a landscape architect, a role he sees as instrumental in crafting environments that marry aesthetics with positive environmental impact. Through his work, he aims to empower individuals to transform their gardens into spaces that foster biodiversity, restore ecosystems, and reverse climate change. I thank y'all very much for listening today. I bring none other to you, Matthieu. Matthieu, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Hey, Maurice, thank you for having me on your show. I'm very excited to be on here. And I have to say, I really love the title of your podcast because the amount of times that I have heard that will never work in my career is quite astonishing. So I really like that title.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm I'll give you a little background on the reason why I chose this title, because of family members, talking about, hey, they're not sure if that's going to work. When you are an entrepreneur and everyone else is working a 9-to-5, sometimes they don't believe that, hey, this is going to work out for you because they haven't been in that space themselves. They might know other people, but that might not work for you. So I had to change this idea that is not going to work into something positive, So that's where the origin of the name.
Yeah, I love that.
Oh, I appreciate it. So, when we talk about that will never work, right? Because we are in a space of disbelief or not understanding what's going on. And funny enough, with you being in gardening and things like that, right? A lot of times we feel like we're in quote unquote the weeds. We get caught up in the vines, whatever it might be that might be holding us back. So how would you suggest for someone to work themselves out of the weeds, if you will?
Yeah, I love that question. And to start off, to explain that, I'll give you a bit of my backstory because I, from a very early age, I was confronted with the problem of weeds. So I grew up on a family farm, right? My father and my brother, they're farmers.
Okay.
So I was blessed to grow up on a farm and experience everything that has to do with farming.
Mm-hmm.
And from a very early age, I got so fascinated about the fact that if you have a tiny little seed and you put that in contact with the soil, that it can grow into a magnificent plant or even in a huge tree. Like the moment I started to realize, I was like, wow, this is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
How is it even possible? So actually from that early experience, I was so intrigued and I wanted to know more about it. And also at that time on our farm, we mostly had cattle and cash crops. So these are crops like grains and corn. So we didn't actually have a vegetable garden. And I, at the age of around, it must have been between 3 and 5 years old, I told my parents, hey, I want to have my own vegetable garden. And they say like, well, we don't have space in the garden. But I kept on pushing and eventually they gave me a piece of the garden. And I said, okay, I'm going to grow radishes. And I can really recommend to anybody who wants to start growing their own food, start out with radishes. Radishes is like the easiest to grow vegetable. You put it in a couple of seeds in the soil. Only a couple of weeks later, you can already harvest it. So I can highly recommend that. But so I did the radishes and I had some early success. I was like, wow, this is so cool. I can now eat my own vegetables. I was so proud of my mother that we could actually eat our own veg. And then I became very enthusiastic and I bought a bunch of other seeds. I bought tomatoes, lettuce, I bought everything. Well, I asked my father, obviously, to buy it. Yeah. And then what happened is, okay, I thought, like, oh, look, this is so easy. Like, okay, I had my little garden. And at that time, I also started to experience what it's like to actually design my own garden. So found some old stones on the farm. I placed them in a symmetrical way. So I really got like intrigued about design as well.
Okay.
But anyways, I said I prepared the soil, I put in some compost, and I just started spreading the seeds randomly everywhere, thinking like, oh, I'll come back in a couple of weeks and it'll be full of tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, everything. This is so easy. But Maurice, I can tell you what happened next. You might already know what happened next in this story. Is that I came back from a holiday with my cousin, where I stayed at my cousin's home after a couple of weeks, thinking like, oh, nice! I can't wait to come back to my garden and look at all the vegetables. And I came home and it was overgrown by weeds, and I was devastated. Like, what? Why didn't nature just provide me with vegetables? Like it worked with radishes, why not with all the other stuff?
Right.
And actually, from that moment on into the rest of my life, I really studied how nature works, because nature works in a certain way. And in fact, weeds are the first plants that come, or I'll put it in a different way. Weeds are not actually something bad. We have to look at weed as something that nature provides to restore itself. So if we disturb the soil, which we have to do for vegetable growing, we kind of destroy the soil. And then what nature does, nature says, oh, I want to restore the health of this soil. The first thing nature puts in is the weeds. Well, it's actually their annual plants to restore the health of the soil. So we're like trying to fight weeds, but it's actually nature that is trying to do something good for the soil. So we have to consider that. And this is something that I teach in my masterclass, and it's part of my my award-winning book, 12 Universal Laws of Nature, how to get the most potential out of your land, is that when you know how nature works, you can use that to your benefit. And so you will no longer, obviously you will still have weeds in your garden, but there's ways to drastically decrease that and come up with systems that are more in harmony with nature, because the universe, God, or whatever you believe in, has created it in a certain way, and you have to work with that rather than against it. Because if you're trying to work against it, it'll break your back. I can tell you that. So that's a kind of what I can talk about in weeds. And then there's ways to control weeds. And one of the most important things to do, and this is kind of one of the principles of regenerative gardening, is that you have to keep the soil covered as much as possible. Because if you keep the soil covered as much as possible, then nature or the universe says like, oh, okay, the soil is covered. We don't have to put any weeds in to restore the health of the soil. Because if you cover the soil, which is called mulching, you can use straw or other materials, leaves even, then you're kind of creating a layer on top of the soil that protects the soil. And that's a very effective way of controlling the weeds. Yeah.
So let's back up for a second, Matthieu. So because let's just the everyday person, right? When we think about the word weeds, we don't consider it as a positive. We think of it as something that's going to strangle whatever we're trying to put into the ground, whatever we're trying to grow or manifest or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting that you're coming from a little bit more positive. I'm gonna say a little bit more. You can express more, right? But because I think some of this is us changing the mindset and even understanding why certain things happen, and how it actually benefits us in the long run. So how important was it for you to change that mindset on this thought on weeds just itself?
Yeah, I think that's a great question once again. And the answer to that is let's look at nature. Like in nature, good and bad doesn't actually exist, right? It's we as humans that perceive certain things. Like if a lion kills a deer, we might perceive it as something bad, but it's just part of how nature works and functions. So that's, I think, one way of putting it, that weeds are neither good or bad. Obviously, you're now getting into the reality of being a gardener. And if it annoys you and if it breaks your back, it's not something you want to have. So, but for me, in my life, when I really started to understand this was when I took a permaculture design course, like a certified course in India at the time. And then it really clicked in me, because you talk a lot about ecology, you learn a lot about these kind of things. So yeah, I think that was an essential moment in my life. And actually in the whole course of my life, and it's probably started from a very early age, but then since 10 years, I'm in the landscape architecture business or industry. I kind of gather information from all kinds of different ways of farming, different ways of gardening, and I synthesize that in the work that I do, or how I teach it to people.
So now, because we have this idea of weeds, we have idea that it's going to strangle us, quote unquote, again, metaphorically, right? So how do we restore? I'm gonna go from your garden perspective. How do we restore the health of our garden, i.e., restore our mindset, restore our environment to produce something magnificent, whatever it might be?
Yeah, very interesting question. So the answer to that, again, it all starts with understanding how nature works. That's like, in my opinion, the base you have to do. But then there's ways to restore the health of your garden, and it all starts with the health of the soil. It's the dirt that's under our feet that we don't really consider much. This is actually the topsoil of our planet, is what sustains us to be alive. So we have to treat it like an organism and treat it very well. So just to start off with, like, in my opinion, chemicals have no use in a garden, even in farming. Because the thing is, and I'll explain a bit more about how soil works. The soil, like if you have a healthy soil, 1 teaspoon of healthy soil can contain more microorganisms than there are people on the whole planet. So the soil is a very complex system, which is called the soil food web, because there's a whole system of worms, even mammals, other insects, microorganisms that are, if the system functions well, they're all working in harmony with each other. And if you use chemicals, you kind of destroy that balance. And it might be a quick fix. Like, let's say that you have a problem with bugs in your garden, you spray it, okay, your bugs will be dead, and you might still have a produce of something, but on the other hand, it will be full of chemicals, so I wouldn't even want to eat that. But more importantly is that it destroys the life of the soil. So if we look at it now on a microscopical level, the microorganisms, which are like tiny, tiny, tiny creatures, they actually function. What they do is they make nutrients that are in the soil, like potassium, phosphorus, all the things that plants need. They make it available for plants. Because also in industrial agriculture, one of the biggest problems that conventional farming is facing is that they have the nutrients in the soil, but the plants cannot absorb them. And the reason why is that these microorganisms play that essential role in doing that. So how it works, if we even go more in detail about it, is that the microorganisms take the nutrients, let's say it's potassium, they change it a little bit, like they digest it in a little way, so that the roots of the plants can take it up. And in exchange, the microorganisms get sugar from the plant, because the microorganisms need sugar to thrive. And the sugar is created from the plants that grow, that make photosynthesis. So they are harvesting sunlight. The plants are harvesting sunlight. They're producing oxygen for us to breathe. they are putting carbon dioxide, CO2, into the soil as well, which is great. That's what we want for to mitigate climate change. And they produce the sugars for the microorganisms so that the plants can absorb the nutrients. So it's really like an immensely beautiful, complex system of cycling nutrients. And how it's even more astonishing is that our own bodies function in exactly the same way, just in inside out. Like the roots of plants are like our stomach, but just inside out. So also in our own personal health, it's super essential to have microorganisms in our body. Apparently, I think for every cell in our body, there's about 20 microorganisms. So you can imagine our body, I don't know how many billion cells our body has, but
Right.
multiply that by 20 and you'll have the amount of microorganisms that are in a person. And again, this is when a person is healthy. If you eat a lot of processed food that is full of chemicals, you won't have that much microorganisms. And that's actually also the reason why there's so many what we call modern diseases like diabetes, cancer. It's because the gut is not functioning well. So now imagine that you can create your own little haven in your garden where you can produce your own healthy food that is not actually that much maintenance. Obviously, you will have to work in the garden, but you'll do it you'll be looking forward to do it. Because how it also turns out is that the link between how the roots of the plants work and how our gut system works is also that the microorganisms are pretty much the same. So meaning that if you as a gardener spend time in your garden and you make sure everything is healthy, you get in contact with your hands with the soil, you will actually absorb those healthy microorganisms, and in turn that will improve your physical health, but also your mental health, because it's also proven that our brain is full of microorganisms. So you could even treat depressions and other things just from spending time in the garden. And this is something that I've also learned from somebody saying, like, if you have any problem in your life, go to your garden and you will find the answers. And it's really true. I don't know if you ever experienced it, but like if you're struggling with something, just go outside. Even if you don't have a garden, go into nature.
Right.
You get a lot of your issues solved. So yeah, that's in a. I'm trying. Yeah, it's not a. It's a bit complex, but I try to make it as abstract as possible.
And that's fine. It's fine. But and so as I'm listening to you talk about these microorganisms and worms and things like that, it makes me think about compost, right? How important that is. And some of us don't want to touch that because of what it appears to be. But we don't understand how important that can be to our garden, to us in growing. So, sometimes we don't want to touch what's nasty and what's, smells like crap. Right.
Yeah.
Long story short.
Yeah, exactly.
But sometimes
I'll tell you something. If your compost smells like crap, then it's not good compost. That's an amazing indicator that we as humans, we know what's good and what is not good. Like if you go to a forest, an indigenous natural forest, and you take up some of the leaves, especially in autumn, and you smell that, you'll smell like a rich kind of sweet smell. And that's a really good indicator of how your compost should smell as well. So obviously we're using waste material that might be smelly at the start, but then once you create good compost, which you should turn regularly, the microorganisms make it actually healthy and smell really good actually.
So because of that, because even with something like that, how long does that something like might take? Because sometimes we don't have the patience. We think that we might get something and hope that it produces tomorrow. So how much patience do you need to have in order to get good compost, in order for you to, even though you said something about radishes, right? You start out with radishes, but all these other things, it takes time. We have to understand the seasons and things like that. So there's a lot of patience in this that I take it as. So with you being the expert in this, How much patience do we need to have in understanding how this works?
As much as you can handle, I would say. Honestly, all good things in life take time. It's something that is universal. I could have actually added that as a universal law in my book. Now I came up with a great idea. Patience is a virtue.
Right.
That it's true, because the thing is that if you start your garden journey, you will get early success. You'll get, like I said, you can start with radishes. You put up your compost pile. It takes a couple, like even if you do a compost in which is more like an intense compost. After 12 weeks, you can have a product that you can use. So there's ways of definitely of speeding things up, and I would highly recommend to speed up things. But yeah, give it some time as well, and this is part of the whole journey, because you will fail. There's no doubt. In gardening, you always fail. You fail yourself to success. That's how it works.
Nice.
You make mistakes. You try and understand what happened, and then you learn from it. Next year, you won't have the problem, or you will know how to solve it. And that's also something that I want to tell people: like, don't get overwhelmed by failure in essence, and don't get overwhelmed by what you have to do. Like, just try. If you fail harder next time. Try again, and it's just a joy of learning it. That's the mental or psychological way of looking at it. I think that's really important.
Nice. So listen, Matthieu. Based off of time, we're going to keep it moving. So my question is, before I let you go, how do someone reach out to you, find your book? How do they even register for your masterclass, things like that? So where can they look you up?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that people can do. You can find me on Instagram under my name, and I think you'll put that in the show notes. There is also my personal company, or I'll put it this way. In my personal Instagram, I give like a lot of tips and tricks for gardening for free, obviously. And then I have another Instagram, which is for my company, my company is called Paulonia Landscape Architects. And that profile is really more about the done for me approach. So I have a bunch of clients where they don't have much time. They have busy jobs. They just want to look nice and beautiful and ecological. So I do everything for them. And I'll give you that link as well. And then what people can do if they're really intrigued about starting their own garden journey, they can go to the website of my masterclass, which is www.gardenofyourdreams. So gardenofyourdreams.com. And there's a bunch of free videos that you can start to watch, which is basically like samples. And if you really enjoy that, you can book a call with me. And we'll see if it's a fit for you to actually learn it in depth to become a very successful gardener and actually provide food for your family, especially healthy food, right? Because now these days it's quite difficult to find that, to source that. So then there's also my book, 12universallaws.com. You can order my book there. And then also I'll send you the website of my company. That is paulonia-la.com.
Okay, cool. And so I do have that. So of course that will be in the show notes. So if even though you might be listening on your way to work or whatever it might be right now, of course, whenever you sit down, click on the link. It's going to say check out the website. It'll be right in the show notes. So it'll be right there. But Matthieu, thank you very much for coming on today.
Thank you, Maurice. I really appreciate it.
No problem. But before I let you go, Matthieu, I got to ask you the question, man.
Yeah.
My would you rather question. So would you rather choose 3 doors or a fork in the road?
I thought about that question beforehand. And now I actually want to go for the fork in the road, because there's a beautiful poem by Rob from your fellow countryman, Robert Frost. 2 roads diverged in the woods. I can highly recommend it to people as well. I think it's an interesting way of looking at life. You always come at at a fork in the road.
Yep.
And then the most important thing, in my humble opinion, is to choose either. Don't stay like look at the two options, but then choose one and go for it, because eventually you'll get to your goals, and it doesn't actually matter that much. Like if you took the wrong one, you'll still find a way to get back on the right track.
Yeah, you're right. I agree with that 100%. I do. But, but Matthieu, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Maurice. This was a lot of fun.
Cool. And you know what? Continue to tune into That Will Never Work podcast, and I will talk to y'all a little later.
Thanks for listening. Find us on social media at Chisholm Group LLC and check back weekly for new episodes. Until next time, that will never work, or will it?